two cars pulled up. I don't know, maybe some of the McDonough boys were in the cars, but they pulled up to the house, and the time I run inside to see what was going on, here's my dad with the wood poker, piece of flat steel with a curve to it, and he's showing people how the Carl D. Bradley broke in half. So I started learning about Carl D. Bradley, and then I never did meet Frank Mays or didn't know anything that he was still alive. And then this winter when I was in Florida, I found out about him through Sherilyn Hunter. And anyway, I stopped and seen Frank and asked him if he would come up to Beaver Island, so he's here. And I've heard his story probably 20 times, and I'm just waiting to hear it again. I never get tired of listening to it. So, thank you, sir.
Well, I'm sure a lot of you senior citizens can go back to 1958. I know I can. I was 26 years old at the time, so that calculates me out to being 82 now. But everything that happened that night is burned in my mind, and I remember it all. And I will tell you some of it, and then I want questions. You got any questions? That will take me into something else that I may have forgot to explain to you. But we had left Rogers City, Michigan with a load of limestone going to Gary, Indiana. And that was to be our last trip of the year, because we were to go to Manitowoc, Wisconsin to get a new cargo hold installed. So we unloaded in Gary, and we left Gary at 9:30 at night, and 2:30 the next afternoon we were due in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. So I was on a 4 to 8 watch, and the next morning I got up at 3:30, I went back after, as we do, for coffee and take a look at the pilot house, and I saw the Wisconsin shoreline lights, so fine. I went into the galley, and he said, oh, 2:30, we're tied up Manitowoc, great. I got off watch at 8 o'clock, went to my room and slept and did other things. In the afternoon, I went down the deck about 3 o'clock, and I couldn't see the shoreline. So back in the galley, he said, oh, we're not going, we're going back to Calcite for another load. So we thought nothing about it. Then you start calculating the time when it Calcite, whether you're on watch or off watch. So this is sometime in the afternoon, and it was roughly about 3 o'clock, and at 3:30 I took coffee up to the pilot house. And the first mate and the captain were up there, and they told me, go back aft, check the coal bunkers, make sure they're pinned and clamped, because we're going to get into some heavy seas. Now this wind was building up way down in the southwest, down in the Plains states, coming up up into Lake Michigan. So I went back after I walked down the port side of the deck. It was moving, but you're used to that. So I went up, checked the coal bunker. Then I went down into the engine room, talked to the engineers, and from there there's a stoker room where the stoker man is, and I went down there, and from there you go into the tunnel underneath the cargo hold. And my job was to go down and sump out any water because our ballast tanks were leaking. Now, the ship holds 18,000 ton of cargo, so we had 12,000 tons of ballast aboard. That's all all she could hold. And they were leaking into the tunnel, so you sunk the tunnel out. When I took my time walking up the tunnel, you could look and you could see her bend and twist and turn. Paid no attention to it. You hear a few rivets popping because she was doing that. When I got up into the dunnage room, I sat down with the deckhand, and all of a sudden there was a big slam, and she started to shake. And then another slam, and the ship started to shake. We got up and raced and looked on the port side, looking at the stack, and it wasn't there. And then it came up, and then it went down. So we turned around to our left, we had it going about 12 feet to our room, got our life jackets. We came out, we looked down the port side, and we saw we couldn't make it. We went to the starboard side, we said, we can't make it, there's 2 lifeboats back aft and a life raft up there. And I said life raft, so we went up on the pilot house deck. And more people were getting up there all the time. And I remember the second mate talking to the captain, that just prior to that, the first mate was on the radio phone with his Mayday message given out. He said, Mayday, 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 this is Carl D. Bradley. We're 12 miles southwest of Gull Island. We're breaking into and sinking. Anybody in the area, come to our aid. And he stayed on that until we actually separated, because he had no more power left. And the captain told the second mate, apparently to go back and launch the lifeboats, because I seen him running down the port side, and we were tearing apart. You could see the cables parting, blue and red flames shooting down there, and I seen him jump in the air. Well, his body was never recovered. Probably never made it. And then Elmer said, someone get the life raft ready, because we were listening to the port side, so I jumped on the life raft, which was midship. And the other men were starting to go to the starboard side, which was the high side, so if they got thrown, they'd get thrown the farthest. And Elmer said all the life jackets from the pilot house were distributed. He had to go 2 decks below to his room to get his jacket, and he said the main deck was already awash, and we were now in 2 pieces. And all of a sudden, the wave come and took us. And I was on the raft, I went down into the water, I come up out of the water, and with one arm, like you're gonna swim, and I hit the life raft. Now the bow is gone, the stern is still out there floating. So the first person was Elmer Fleming, the first mate. I helped him aboard, and we helped 2 other men. And 4 of us were on the raft watching the stern float even keel, lights on, then it tipped, wheel up, and went straight down. When the after cabins where the boiler area is, that hit the water and it exploded in a red ball of flame. And still the lights were on, and then it disappeared and everything went dark. And that was it. So then, Elmer Fleming, he was the first mate, and so he took charge and kind of got us orientated. We knew our situation, we knew how bad it was. And there's a compartment on this life raft, because the life raft was 2 long steel tanks and 2 platforms. Either side would be the right side if you tipped over. And the deck of the life raft was slats with openings where we stuck our fingers into to hang on with. Well, he got down in the compartment, and there were 3 flares, so he took them out, and he lit one, and then he lit another, because he knew the Christian Satori, a German ship, was on its way to Chicago. He knew it was out there somewhere, but she was fighting the wind and the seas trying to get to us, so it took her a long time. So on the life raft, we were in 40-foot waves, and we would go up those waves up to the top, and the raft would actually tip over, and we'd all fall off.
No.
And the raft stayed down in the trough. We were able to get back on until the 3rd time we couldn't get the 4th man aboard the raft. This man, I remember, he was dressed in a sweatshirt, khaki pants, and socks, and a life jacket. That's all he had. Now, our life jackets were a vest made out of canvas with cork. That's all it was. Did not have a collar, didn't have a crotch strap on it, and if it came up, the cork would hit you in the face. So, as time was going on, and Elmer told us about the Christian Satori out there, well, we kind of settled down at this time, but this is before we started tipping over. He says, I see some running lights, and we did. We saw the red and green light and the mast light of the Christian Satori coming to us. So Elmer waited, he took the last flare out of his jacket, he tried to light it, and it would not ignite. Then we saw her red light disappear, and we saw more of her green light, because they're at an angle, they call it 2 points abaft the beam, because you only be a certain point, so we know which way the ship is turning. And we saw her actually turn away from us. And then we started riding out the night, then we started tipping over. And eventually, I got back into the compartment, and I pulled out the sea anchor, and I tied that on. Then we would start going up these waves, the raft would shake, and then we would go through the waves and back down the other side, because that created a drag. And we went down at 5:30 at night, and we were found at 8:30 the next morning. And who found us, I'll give you a quick story, was the cook. He was 20 years old, and before we left Charleroi, the son who was laid up at they had to have a certain percentage of crew in order to come out to get us. So they needed a corpsman, a cook, and an engineer, and a few others. Well, I talked to the captain, the son, who later on in years, several times, and he said when they took her out, they rolled 55 degrees. And he said stuff was coming all off, the food was coming out of the cabinets, water got through the pilot house back in the area where the main radio was, and that knocked that out. The engineer complained, he said water's coming over the bow, getting into the stack, and could kill his engines. And slowly, as time was going on, he got the crew settled down, and he called the cook up. It was getting daylight. He called him up on the bridge. Now, in October of 08, November is the 50th anniversary. In October of 08, I went to a Walmart supermarket in Zephyrhills, Florida, and we parked alongside this Michigan car. So my wife knows it. She said, "Oh, Michigan, where are you from?" The guy said, "Charleroi." She said, "Well, my husband used to live in Charleroi," which I did. I had a farm when I worked for Medusa Cement. I said, "What's his name?" She said, "Frank Mays." Was that the guy in Bradley? She said, "Yeah." So later she comes over and she said, "You know this fella?" I said, "No, I never met him, now this is 50 years later." And it was Dick Sellison, the cook, who first spotted us. And how he did on the bridge, he said he told the captain, "I see something on the horizon," and the captain looked to his binoculars and said, "Could be some deer hunters going back to the mainland." He said, "No, sir." He said, "It's too flat. It can't be a boat." And he looked again, and it was Elmer Nye. So what they did, now the seas are still going up and down, and we didn't realize this, that we couldn't move. Because we found out later that our bodies were shutting down, and your body was kept warm in here, in your extremities, nothing. We couldn't move our arms and legs, and we didn't realize this, because the Sundew, when it spotted us, it came up broadside, kind of blocked the seas, we're going up and down, and these sailors are buoy jumpers, so they would jump on. At first they threw us a rope, but we couldn't grab the rope, we didn't know we couldn't move. So they jump on, and as the raft and the Sundew got even, they grabbed us and picked us up and just threw aboard, one at a time. But prior to that, now, there was 4 in the raft. Well, the one guy, the third time it tipped over, we couldn't get him back aboard. He was wore out, we were wore out. So another fella and I, Gary Streletsky, we took an arm, we put it between our legs, we held on to it. And he had a life jacket on, he's the man with the sweatshirt and the khaki pants. Finally, as time went by, we looked and his head was underwater. And I picked him up by the hair and I looked, and so I just saw the white of it, just a splint. So I looked at Gary, he looked at me, and we released him. His body was never found. And I talked to a few doctors about that, and they assured me he was already dead from hypothermia. And just as it was breaking day, Gary got the strength, and he started foaming at the mouth, and he crawled off of the raft and started swimming away. Now the ship, the Trans-Ontario, picked him up and radioed back. We got a man off to Bradley, he has a jacket on, he said he has a breath of life left in him. So a doctor from Beaver Island, an elderly doctor, volunteered to go on a helicopter. He did start out, but then they called back and said Gary had passed away. So then we found Elmer Nye. So that's briefly the story. Now I will answer any questions you have if there's something I could have missed. Yes?
Can you describe the submarine trip down later when you were vindicated?
That was in 1995. I got with a group that asked me if I wanted to go out and see the Bradley in a 2-person submarine. Oh, it was a short submarine. You laid on your belly. The pilot sat on a little stool and you laid underneath him. And I went down to see it and I identified the name and the whole thing. But I only was in the stern section. I didn't see the bow. So in 1997, I went with a group again, the same type of people with a remote operated vehicle. And that vehicle was done in 24 hours, and we had all the monitors, all the tapes going, and we saw the 2 pieces. They're 120 feet apart. And the thing is, they're upright with a slight port list to them. So the Bradley didn't tip or anything. And the stern section, when she went wheel up, it must have went down and hit the bottom and just laid back, because you can walk underneath the rudder and the propeller. Same way with the bow, it must have wiggled down because you walk underneath the bow. Yes?
From the time you first started hearing rivets pop until you found yourself in the water, any idea about how long?
Well, it was moving, we kept moving. We heard the first thud, the second thud, we never stopped, we just kept looking and moving. So within 5 minutes, we were in the water. But the stern was still afloat yet.
Yeah.
But the valve was now gone because the valve was completely open with all the mechanism, where the stern was open a cargo hole, but then going in the engine room, there's a door that was dog tight, so that would be watertight. But we were completely open. And see, the waves were probably about 30 foot then, and we just got washed off, we got caught.
How long was it, Brad?
638 feet.
Had you been in 40-foot water before?
No. But I never thought of it, you just, it's the same thing, you know. And when I went down to see it, and even in 97, the boom was still in the saddle with its cables on it. You would think it would twist and fall off, but it never did. And I'm still a crew member. I've never been discharged because the captain signs your discharge, and as a captain's supposed to do, he didn't do it down with his ship. But anything else? Yes,
What time of the year was it, like what month?
November the 18th. we got caught on what they call the gales of November.